Welcome to Weary Wolf Adventures. Today we are going to have a go at making a worm composting bucket or bin. I'm going to use some of these 5 litre buckets here. I'm going to try and do this completely free using what I've got at the moment. So I've been out digging, moving manure, and in the process collecting some worms. So that didn't cost me any money. Composting matter. Basically all the ingredients we need to get this up and running, and then we can feed the worms with some household compost waste from kitchen scraps. Hopefully all going well, if they settle in and they're happy in the wormery, they will produce wormcasts, which are a super compost. They call them black gold. Right, let's get started. I've noticed that I'm in the kitchen, I'm being a bit naughty, and I'm doing it indoors because Vicky's gone to football and the weather outside's not very nice. It's freezing cold and I don't want to be out there. We'll clean everything. I'll disinfect the kitchen afterwards. I don't even know that I've been in here and done it. Right, so let's quickly go through the things I'm going to need to get this little vermiculture wormery up and running. First things first, we've got some, we only need one lid. We've got some plastic buckets. These are leftover fishing feed buckets, which we are going to need to make holes in. So we need a drill, and we're going to need a drill piece small enough to avoid the worms escaping, because we don't want worms getting out and going everywhere. To start off, as we settle the worms into their new home, we are going to need some compost. We're going to shred up some cardboard matter. I'm adding some manure because that's what the worms were in and using in the first place, where I collected them from. It's all about getting the worms settled in and then hopefully getting them to work, creating some worm castings for us. Then we're going to shred up some dry leaves, which is another natural food for worms. And then finally, the worms are going to need something coarse to aid with their digestion. So when they're taking in all of that vegetable matter, the leaves, the worms don't have teeth, so they need some grit inside them, which helps to scrunch up and digest all of that vegetation. We're going to put in some really coarse gravel, grit. I'd say that's grit. And another option, which we're going to do both, is some eggshells, which we're going to blend up into a powder. Let's do that first. So made like a fine grit of eggshells. So with that done, we'll start drilling the holes next. It's really important that we provide enough holes to allow oxygen. So we've got plenty of holes in the top. Should be small enough. I mean, some of the smaller worms may escape, but should be sufficient to let enough oxygen and airflow inside the containers. So next we need to turn our attention to the bottom. Now, one of these is going to be left intact. This is going to be the main base of the wormery. This is not going to have any worms in it. This is going to be the catchment area for any excess liquids, because it's really important that it's not too wet. So it needs to be moist. In order for the worms to be happy and survive, it needs to be moist, but we don't want it to get too much and have an excess of water at the bottom, which will then go stagnant and cause all sorts of mayhem. So the idea is, first of all, in this one here, so this is a base. This one here, when it sits inside, as you can tell, it will sit that far above the one below it, but it seals tight, as you can see. And then we're going to drill some holes into the bottom of this one. I think six holes should be sufficient. And then we just sit the tub. And then we just sit the bar over the top like that, which just stops it from accidentally sliding out. We can start adding our ingredients Gonna shred up some bits of cardboard, some old packaging cardboard which has got no ink on it. Then we're going to add some of our compost material. It makes a really good base bedding material just for the worms to live in, and it's also very important to have this in here and not just go straight for, what is that? It's a stone which is shaped like a plectrum, a guitar pick. How bizarre. This is also going to be somewhere for the worms to lay their eggs so that they can reproduce more worms to keep this wormery going. So there's our layer of compost on top of the shredded cardboard matter. Then we've got some of the lovely manure, which is straw, hay, all the goodness from the food eaten by Rosie the horse down at the allotment. So we're going to scrump up some of that into, this is probably the thing I'm sure Vicky would be most disappointed about having done in the kitchen, but like I said, she won't know by the time she gets home. Well, until she views the video, and by that time it will be clean, done. Right, so I don't want to overload this, so I think that will do. So we've got a layer of manure in with the compost. There's plenty of moisture inside the manure and the compost, so that's going to wet down. As you can see already, it's wetting down and breaking down the cardboard. Some of the grit and eggshells, the calcium from the eggshells, is going to be beneficial anyway, so we'll put that in, add that to the mix. I think this is the really important part of this, is to get it established and get the worms in happy, reproducing and going to work for us straight away. So getting the right combination of different material inside is just going to give us a really good head start, and then we can start composting our household kitchen waste. Obviously no meats, no dairy, no chemicals. So it's going to be carrot peelings, potato peelings. You want to avoid putting in too many onions and garlic. And we've got some leaves. Just making sure there's nothing else inside those leaves. We don't want a slug infestation. Crunch it all about, get it all mixed in. And then I'm just gonna pat it down nicely, so we've still got plenty of room there for our compost. They're all digging in, settling into their new environment, apart from this one who wants to escape. Must be about 50-60 worms there, all collected from the allotment. The final bit for today with the setup is the worms are going to get settled in, and then we're going to add today's kitchen scraps, which we've got some fresh carrots chopped up, which they will start to work on. A little interesting fact, they don't eat and digest the carrots as you put them in. What they do is they wait for the vegetable matter to start to decompose, to rot down, for mold, fungus, and the worms will come up and they will eat and digest that. So effectively they're just aiding in the rotting down of the vegetables. So I'm going to find a worm munching on this piece of carrot, but as the carrot starts to degrade inside this composting system, that's when the worms are going to get to work. Doing the research, because this is all new to me, and I just thought that was a fascinating fact. A couple more facts before we go, because we're pretty much set. In considerations, so I've already discussed not putting too many onions and garlic in there. We don't want to overload this system either. This is on a micro scale. I don't want to invest in buying some larger scale buckets or spending any money until I know that I've got this technique nailed down. You may be watching this thinking, well, that bucket's tiny, you're not going to get much compost out of that. This is my experiment, guys, and if I can get this working and it's a success, we're going to definitely scale up to the point where I will be putting all of my kitchen scraps, vegetable scraps, into a large worm composting system. The idea is when this one is fully rotted down and consumed and digested all of the vegetable matter, and I'm ready to harvest the worm castings, another tub would be placed on top with holes in the bottom big enough for the worms to move up into the next level. You're looking at it as a stage leveling system. So once you stop putting vegetable matter into the bottom layer, because you're happy with the amount of decomposition and digesting the worms have done, you put the next level on, you put a new layer of compost cardboard, and you start adding in your vegetable matter, and then the worms will by themselves be drawn up out of this bucket into the next bucket to get to the food source, which is then lacking in the one they're in. Therefore, you're making it an easier way of harvesting the worm castings, which we can then use on our vegetable beds. So once the worms have all moved up into the next tier, we then remove this one, harvest the compost, and then repeat the cycle. And another consideration that we need to look at with this system is where we're going to store it, because if they get too much of a hard frost, the worms will then go into dormancy and they won't be consuming and composting as well as they could be. I'm looking at storing this one in the shed for the time being, and we'll see how we get on. And obviously having a decent layer of compost at the bottom, a bedding area somewhere for the worms to live. They're not just exposed on vegetable matter waiting for it to rot down. That will aid them in surviving the cold. And then a consideration for us in the summer is the heat. So you don't want to have these out in direct sunlight. You don't want them to get overheated. So if they get too hot, that will kill off the worms. So those are just little considerations that we need to make whilst we're doing this. It's all learning, I'm sharing as I learn. So considerations for storage for high and low temperatures, making sure that the moisture level inside is damp enough for them to be comfortable, not too wet. That's where we've aided that situation by having the drip tray at the bottom. And as we're discussing this, a really important factor which I didn't mention, which I've just remembered, we need to use rainwater. It's really important that we use rainwater to moisten the wormery. I just collect the rainwater from one of the water butt systems we've got in the garden. That water contains chlorine and chemicals, and we really don't want to upset the worms or even kill the worms by adding a chemical mix to the system. I hope you found that interesting. It's a learning curve. I'm excited to see what happens with this. If it works, we'll scale up. I'll share that with you. We'll have another video up where we scale up on with bigger buckets. I just think it's interesting. I've really gone into it this year with the composting. Is there anything else I could be doing composting wise? Is there stuff I need to be looking at? Is there stuff I've missed out? Are there any other techniques and ideas you'd like me to take a go at? Because I'm going big on compost this year. Grow your own, self-sufficiency. And I think soil is underrated, underutilized system which we could be doing instead of just buying in compost all the time. So yes, I do buy compost. But I'm going to try and provide more of my own. So thank you for watching. Take care. Bye bye.